Coming up, you'll see baking fresh bread using the Breadman bread mixes, baking fresh bread using your own ingredients, and bread making tips direct from the Breadman himself, George Burnett.
Hello, I'm George Burnett, the Breadman. And I'd like to take a moment and thank you personally for purchasing what I believe to be the ultimate bread machine on the market today. I personally and the great team at Trillium Health Products have put this videotape together to show you just how easy it is to use this new Breadman machine of yours. Now, I'd like to take just a moment and start really with the beginning. I'd like you to take the instruction manual and read over this, because there are a lot of good tips that you'll find in the instruction manual. Secondly, I'd like you to open up the bread machine, and inside you'll see the baking pan. At the front edge of the baking pan is several different arrows. One will show you how to remove the baking pan, and on the inside of the baking pan you will see that the dough paddle has been taped down for shipping. So I'd like you to remove the tape off of the dough paddle, and then I'd like you to rinse out the baking pan with some hot water, and then with a paper towel just dry out the inside of the baking pan. Plug in the machine, and let's start baking some bread. Let me show you how easy it is to use my Breadman machine. There's really two different ways to make bread. One is I've taken my most popular recipes and pre-packaged those to make it as simple as possible for you to make breads on a daily basis. And the other way is to take individual ingredients, and it's called making breads from scratch, and it's actually a lot simpler than it sounds. Let me show you first how to take and make breads with the pre-packaged mixes. All right, the instructions on the back say to add water first. And we will start out with this bread mix, which is a 7-grain bread, one of my personal favorites. And we will start with 1 cup and 2 tablespoons of water, which, by the way, is 9 ounces. We finish the water here. 2 tablespoons, there's our water. Now I will open up the 7-grain mix box. And these are made with all natural ingredients. Tear open this. Add this into the baking pan. It's very simple, very easy to do. Now inside the box is a packet of yeast. So you'll need to look for that separately. And just take and shake this like this. And then tear open the yeast and add it into just the top of the flour right there. Not a bad idea to make a little indentation as the yeast goes in. Now, we're really all done. All done mixing, and we just take the baking pan, set it inside, and then we will select the cycle. So let's talk about the control panel for just a moment here. You'll see that there is a select button here first. Let's select the right setting. Here's the setting that the instructions will call for, the light setting. So the top of the control panel says basic wheat. Let's take and select across the top, and there's a little circle that will move across over to the light setting. We've got it set on light. It's very simple. We push start. The machine programs itself, and you're all done. Now that's the easy way to make bread. It reads 2 hours and 20 minutes right there, and it will beep when it is all done. It will give you like 3 triumphant beeps that say, I'm done baking, and the bread is ready for you to eat. So that's all you have to do. And really what I set out to do was to make bread baking as easy as possible, and that's why I developed these bread mixes right here. All right, let me review just a couple tips. One is make sure and get the water the exact amount. 1 cup, 2 tablespoons, or if you have a little scale, 9 ounces. Very important. Another little tip is to make that indentation in the top of the flour and to pour the yeast into that little indentation. Nice little tip, especially because we have a delay timer on this control panel, which will allow you to make bread and come home from work and the bread is just fresh and hot, out of the bread machine. So that's very important that the yeast stays inside that little tiny indentation. Now another tip is just that in the beginning stages of the bread mixing, you can hear the machine working right now, doing all the work for you, is that feel free to go ahead and once in a while open up the lid if you'd like and take a look inside. Now we've designed this so that there's a window here and you can look inside and so forth and watch the baking process and all. But in the beginning, go ahead and open this up, watch the dough mixing. And then the other thing is, I really encourage this, is to get to know the feel of the dough. Because as you might want to experiment with making some different recipes and so forth, you will need to know what consistency the dough should be. So feel the dough a little bit. And my little boys, they jump up on the counter and they love to see the bread mixing right here. So feel free once in a while, open the lid, close it back down, don't leave it open, and then watch it through the window right there. While the machine is mixing the dough, there will be some steam that will gather on this window inside. And then while it starts to bake, all that steam will disappear and you can see the whole baking process just fine. Just as a precaution, the window, the vents, and the sides will be hot, so don't touch those areas during baking. The recipe for the bread that I'm going to make right now comes from my Breadman's Healthy Bread book. This book has over 100 recipes in it. All my favorite recipes from the last 15 years of baking experience. And a sampling of this book is included with your machine, and it's called the Healthy Bread Recipes. Well, the original bread recipe that I started out with years and years ago it's called 100% whole wheat bread. And so let's make that right now. This is really making breads by scratch, so let's get started by taking out the baking case. To remove, you turn it counterclockwise. So let's turn it just a few degrees counterclockwise, lift it out, very easy to do. Now, let's begin to assemble all the ingredients for this bread. First off, it calls for water. Now there's two ways to measure water. The first way is to measure water into a measuring container. This 1 cup measuring container, we need 9 ounces of water for this bread, which is 1 cup and 2 tablespoons. So there's our first cup, 2 tablespoons of warm water. Not too hot, it might damage the yeast, and also not too cold. It's about 80-degree water that you'd really need. The other way to measure water is by taking water and using a scale, an ounce scale, and measuring 9 ounces in this scale. Really, this is the way I like to do it. There are 2 ingredients that are very important to have accurate. One is water and one is flour. The others are not as critical. So either way will work fine for you. Now our second ingredient is to take a little bit of oil. Not a mandatory ingredient because we'll use another ingredient called lecithin that could replace the oil if you want to stay away from any oil. But I don't use just any oil. I use canola oil or oils that are the healthier style of oils, very low in saturated fats. Now, the recipe calls for 1 1/2 tablespoons of canola oil or other healthy type of oil in this particular recipe. And as we put this in, I'd like to say one thing about the 2 kinds of recipes that you will find in my recipe book. One is called transition recipes, which does have some things like unbleached white flour in it. It also has ingredients that you will find typically in any cupboard or in any supermarket. Now the other style of recipe, and this is what most of the book has, it has 70 recipes that are called elite, and I think they're the best. And they're all whole wheat, and they're all honey sweetened or other type of non-refined type of sweeteners, only healthy oils, no dairy fats in there. So most of the book is focused on healthy bread. But anyway, and that's what this one is right here. So it has a few unusual ingredients. Canola oil you can find at the supermarket though. Second ingredient in this bread is honey. And if you'll put your oil in the tablespoon first, then when you put your honey in, the honey slides right out. Now there's 1 tablespoon of honey, and it'll call for 1 1/2 tablespoons of honey. I don't believe in refined white sugar, and so I don't have any in any of my recipes, honey or other type of sweeteners. And in some of my recipes, In fact, my banana date bread doesn't have any sweetener except a banana and some dates. So I'm very keen on using only the best ingredients for my family, for yourself, to make the best bread. Now the next ingredient is lecithin. Lecithin is a very healthy ingredient, and I talk all about it in the book, so you can read all about it. But I'll tell you what, there's two ways to measure lecithin. The first way, and it calls for 1/2 of a teaspoon. So you could measure 1/2 a teaspoon into here and then pour it out, but lecithin is kind of sticky. So what I recommend is just try it a couple times, and pretty soon you'll know that lecithin is, if you have a little honey bear, I recommend getting some honey bears and using the honey and then putting lecithin and canola oil and these kind of things. Lecithin, if you squeeze that to the count of 3, it's about 1/2 a teaspoon. You don't have to bother with wiping this out. And I want to make it as simple and easy for you to make these breads on a daily basis. So that's something I do. Now, next ingredient, we're going to go into our dry ingredients now. We're going to start out with our dry ingredients with whole wheat flour, 100% whole wheat flour. So let me move the flour over here. And there's two ways to measure flour. Let me show you the first way. First way is to take a 1-cup measure, and rather than scoop the cup into the flour sack, I'd like to recommend something. I'd like to recommend spooning it into your 1-cup measure, and then taking a regular table knife and flattening off the top like this. Now, that's the first way. And that'll work pretty good. And this recipe calls for 3 cups of whole wheat flour. But the second way, and this is what I do, it's because 2 ingredients, remember, need to be very accurate, water and flour. I really like this little scale right here. You need 3 cups of flour, and 3 cups of flour in a packed sack from the supermarket might be different than if you dump the sack into another container and then spoon it out and so forth. So I like to measure ounces. And then, so here's what I do. You need 14 ounces of whole wheat flour. And you can just take, with your little measuring cup, get 14 ounces right here. And there we go. Just a little bit over. There's 14 right there. Now, this particular scale, and you might have one of these scales around the house, or you might have one that, and just borrow one from a friend if a friend has one, or get one of these scales. They're not that much. And this one has a little stainless steel little container like this. It fits nicely into the baking pan, and put that in there. Okay. And then we'll add the rest of our dry ingredients. This first dry ingredient is gluten flour. Now, if you're buying just regular supermarket whole wheat flour, it might not be high protein flour. And so I recommend a little gluten flour, and gluten is part of the wheat kernel. And so what you'll do is, this recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of gluten flour. And what this does is it strengthens the dough, so the dough doesn't rise up and then collapse at all. Now, 2 tablespoons there. We need 3 tablespoons of whey. Now, whey doesn't have any dairy fat in it, so I think it's even better than a milk product, like a dried milk. And so we need 3 tablespoons of whey. You'll need to find this one in the health food store as well. The transition recipes call for dried powdered milk, because that's what typically you would have in your cupboard at home. And I want you to be able to make those recipes very easily with the ingredients you have in your own kitchen. So 3 tablespoons of whey. And what it does is it conditions the dough. It even gives it a little bit better crumb, or what that means is that it's a softer bread than a hard bread without the whey in there. And it's also a yeast food and helps the bread rise better. You see, we're making 100% whole wheat bread, and traditionally, if you've ever seen whole wheat bread that maybe you've made or someone else has made, sometimes it doesn't rise very good. It's kind of heavy. Well, this is nice, light rising whole wheat bread right here. We're making the best. I'm showing you how to make the best, most nutritious, and the best whole wheat bread right here. Now, I like to use then sea salt rather than just regular salt. I think there's some differences there. It doesn't have any aluminates in it and so forth. So I take some sea salt and 1½ teaspoons of sea salt, and then we'll finish with our yeast. Now, there's Saf yeast, there's Red Star yeast, there's Fleischmann's yeast, and I've used them all in my bakeries and still use them all and try them out. And so what we'd want to do, 2 teaspoons of yeast And that's what we finish up with. So we have all the ingredients in the baking pan now. We will move this back into the oven part. Notice once again, you'll put it in on a little bit of a twisted angle. All right, just like that. And then go in the direction of the arrow, which is now clockwise, to tighten the baking pan into the locking unit in the bottom of the oven. There we go. Tip the handle back. It's ready to go. Let's close the lid, and now we will select the cycle. We will select across from medium to dark, then to light. That's my favorite setting for this particular bread. It's ready to push start. 2 hours and 20 minutes will read on the display. The machine starts to stir. It will stir for a couple minutes, then start to knead, then go through all the baking process, and you've got the best whole wheat bread out there with the Breadman right here. Another very nice feature about the Breadman machine is the delay baking timer. What this means is that if you would like to have fresh bread tomorrow morning, and it's, let's say, 10 o'clock at night and you're just getting ready to go to bed, then put all the ingredients, as the recipe calls for, into the baking pan. Place the pan inside, and then select any one of the basic wheat settings. I prefer light setting for many of the recipes. So that is set, and then go to the timer buttons right here. Push the timer button, the arrow going up. It starts with 2 hours and 20 minutes. Now that will, every time we push the button, it will add 10 minutes to the time allowed on the timer. So we will add now 3, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7, and we would like to have 8 hours and 30 minutes. Remember, it was 10 o'clock at night. The bread you want it to be done at 6:30 a.m. That is 8 hours and 30 minutes from now until the bread should come out and you can eat it. And so we have 8 hours and 30 minutes on the display, and now we will need to push start, and that will then start the little colons blinking, and it is timed and ready to go. What we've done is designed a special feature into the Breadman machine, into the basic wheat, European, and the fruit and nut cycles, for doing things like variety breads and raisin breads, allowing you to add some of the ingredients at a later time. Well, what the machine does is it begins to knead and develop the dough. But 8 minutes before it finishes kneading, it will beep, and it will tell you that's the time to add the additional ingredient or the raisins or whatever it might be. Now the machine will beep or buzz 3 times when it's all done baking. Now when that happens, reach over and push stop. Open the lid, and the bread is all done, as you see. Now it's best to put on some baking mitts or use some pot holders because it's very hot inside here. Reach the handle, lift it up, and release the baking pan and lift out the bread. Now the best way to do this, I've found, is to have one hand on the bottom of the canister here, the baking pan, and put the handle towards the bottom right here, and then gently just shake out the bread onto a cooling rack. I like to stand it up just like that and let it cool. Now when bread is fresh hot out of the oven, it's best not to slice it right then. It's pretty soft and needs to cool. And it's best, like I said, not to leave it on a counter or it'll sweat on the bottom and become kind of soggy. So get a cooling rack like that. Now this bread right here came out just a few moments ago, and so let's take and slice this raisin bread right here. It's kind of nice to have a little bread board like this, and then you'll really appreciate a good bread knife as well. A good bread knife usually is long and has a serrated edge, as this one does. I like to hold the bread on the top, just like this, and then just draw the knife back and forth through the bread, just like that. Now, there's several different ways to store the bread. If you're going to eat only a half of loaf of this bread, and you'd like to keep some of it for the next several days, then a couple things you can do. After the bread has been cooled out properly, now this has been cooled about an hour, and I prefer not to slice and eat the bread for at least 10 minutes, and preferably more like 15 or 20 is about the right time. The bread will still be warm, so you're still getting nice, warm, fresh, hot bread. After an hour and a half, it'll be kind of almost too cool. So slice the bread, let it cool a little bit more, and there are several ways to keep it then and keep it very fresh. A plastic bag will work quite well. Not putting it in the refrigerator, though, because it will dry out. A bread canister or a bread box works very nicely. And if you'd like to keep it for a long period of time, over several days, say 4 or 5 days, it's best to put it in your freezer. It won't dry out near as much. One of the real beauties about my Breadman machine is that there really isn't any cleanup at all. If you'd like to clean it up, let me give you a few tips. The inside of the baking pan actually has a non-stick surface here. So it's very important that you don't put any hard metal objects or abrasive cleaners or scrubbing pads on the inside right here. If you'd like to wipe that out, just a damp towel, paper towel, something like that, and wipe that out. But actually, I prefer not to wash that between the different bakings. I don't know any other professional bakers that wash all their bread pans between baking breads each day either. And I guess the reason is that these things are sterilized at 300 degrees, nearly 300 degrees each time the bread is baked. So I prefer not to clean up. So let's put it back inside. And one last time, put it in here and turn it just a little bit clockwise till it locks in place. We're all done, ready for the next baking. We hope this tape has been informative. I hope you use your Breadman machine every day. I know if you'll focus in on the whole grain breads, you'll be healthier. I've given you today some of the tips that I've learned over my past 15 years of baking experience. I just want to finish by saying the best of health to you from the Breadman.